But nothing came of Chichikov's plans. In the first place, he woke up later than he'd intended. Then, when he sent to inquire whether the horses were harnessed and everything was ready, he was informed that the horses were not harnessed, and nothing was ready. That was in the second place. He lost his temper and was ready to give friend Selifan something in the nature of a drubbing, only waiting to hear first what excuse the man would have to offer. Soon Selifan appeared in the doorway, and his master was regaled with the usual stuff put forward by servants when urgent departure is essential. "But we'll have to have the horses shod, sir," Selifan announced. "Ah, you blockhead. Why didn't you say so earlier, you idiot? Perhaps you couldn't find time for it?" "Oh, no, sir, I had the time, but then there is this wheel. Its hoop needs tightening, sir. The road is very poor, sir. It's full of holes. And then, I must report, sir, that the front part of the carriage is rather shaky. It doesn't look as if it'd hold out even for 2 laps of the journey." "You scheming son of a bitch," Chichikov shouted, throwing up his arms and coming so close to Selifan that the latter took the precaution of stepping aside and backing away. "So you've been trying to kill me, is that it? You're planning to stick a knife into me, you bandit? You damned blockhead. You outlandish freak. Tell me, why now? We've been here for 3 weeks, and you've never even so much as mentioned anything, and now you serve it up to me at the last moment? Just when everything's set and ready and we should just get into the carriage and drive off, that's when you play your filthy tricks on me. But you were aware of all these things before. You were, weren't you? Come on, answer me." "I was, sir," Selifan said, lowering his head. "Then why didn't you tell me?" To this, Selifan made no reply, but with his head still lowered, looked as though he was remarking to himself, Well, I knew it all right, but didn't say nothing. It beats me too. Now go and get a blacksmith. I'll give you 2 hours for everything to be taken care of. You hear? 2 hours, without fail. If it isn't ready, I'll twist you and tie you into knots." Chichikov was really very angry. Selifan was already facing the door, ready to carry out his orders, when he turned back and said, "And then too, sir, that dappled horse of ours? The best thing we could do is sell him, because he's more of a hindrance than a horse, sir." "Is that so? So you expect me to rush out and sell it now?" "Honestly, sir, he only looks like he's useful. But in truth, he's the slyest horse I've ever set eyes on. There isn't another horse like—" "Idiot! When I decide to sell him, I'll sell him. After all you've done, you want to give me an argument too, is that it? Wait and see what'll happen to you if you don't get the blacksmith here, and if everything isn't ready within 2 hours. I'll give you such a beating, you won't recognize your own face after it. Now go, get going." This time Selifan left. Chichikov's mood was completely spoiled, and he threw down the saber that accompanied him on all his trips to encourage proper respect from the right people. It took him a good quarter of an hour to come to terms with the blacksmiths who, like most blacksmiths, were a bunch of cutthroats, and, realizing that their services were urgently needed, wanted to charge 6 times more than their work was worth. It was in vain that Chichikov raged, calling them crooks and highway robbers, and even hinting at the Day of Judgment. The blacksmiths refused to budge. They wouldn't reduce their price, and what's more, instead of completing the work in 2 hours, they took a whole 6. During that time, Chichikov went through what every traveler experiences when his suitcase is packed, when scraps of paper, pieces of string, and such rubbish is all that remains strewn on the floor, when he no longer belongs to a place, and yet hasn't regained the road either, when he looks out the window and sees people in the street, dragging their feet as they walk, absorbed in their petty preoccupations, people who lift their eyes to look at him with dull curiosity and then walk on, depressing the immobilized traveler even further. Everything he sees disgusts him. The little store opposite his window. The head of the old woman in the house across the street as he approaches a window with half curtains. Everything. But he does not leave the window. He remains standing there, now unseeing, lost in his thoughts, now focusing his strangely blunted attention again on everything in front of him, whether it's moving or not, and, out of spite, squashing a fly which buzzes and struggles between his finger and the window pane. But everything comes to an end, and the awaited moment arrived. Everything was ready. The front of the carriage was repaired. A new hoop was tightly fixed around the wheel. The horses had been watered, and the crooked blacksmiths had departed after counting their money and wishing them a good trip. Soon the horses were harnessed. 2 hot loaves of bread straight from the bakery were stored in the carriage, and Selifan thrust something to chew on the road into the compartment under the driver's box. Finally, Chichikov himself got into the carriage, to the cap waving of the inn servant, still wearing the same cotton frock coat and watched by all sorts of servants and coachmen, from the inn and elsewhere, who had gathered to gape at the gentleman as he departed. And the carriage of the type used by bachelors, the carriage that had remained idle in the town for so long and of which the reader is possibly quite sick by now, drove out of the gates of the inn. Thank God, Chichikov thought, and crossed himself. Selifan cracked his whip. Petrushka, who had been standing on the step, clambered up beside him. Chichikov installed himself more comfortably on the seat covered with a Caucasian rug, thrust a leather cushion behind his back, and pressed the 2 warm loaves against his knees as the carriage started skipping and swaying over the cobblestones, a type of paving renowned for its bounciness. Chichikov was full of a strange, undefined emotion as he looked at the houses, the walls, the fences, and the streets. They seemed to be skipping up and down as they slowly receded, and God alone knew whether he would see them again in his lifetime. Turning a corner, the carriage had to stop and wait for an apparently endless funeral procession to pass. Chichikov leaned out and sent Petrushka to inquire who was being buried. It turned out to be the public prosecutor. This produced a very unpleasant effect upon him. He moved into a corner, pulled the leather cover over him, and let down the window curtains. Selifan and Petrushka piously took off their caps and busied themselves examining what people were wearing and in what they were riding. Then they began to count to see how many were on foot and how many riding, and Chichikov, who had told them to ignore any servants they might know, also started to examine the procession, peeping surreptitiously through a crack in the window curtain. All the officials, hatless, were walking behind the coffin. He was a bit worried at first, lest they should recognize his carriage, but they had other things on their minds. They weren't even conversing with one another on everyday topics, as is usual among people paying their last respects to a departed acquaintance. Everyone's thoughts that day were concentrated exclusively on what the new Governor-General would be like, how he would settle in, and how it would affect each of them. The officials on foot were followed by carriages from which peeped ladies in black hats with veils. From the movements of their lips and hands, it could be seen that they were engaged in lively conversation. Possibly they too were talking of the arrival of the new Governor-General, about the balls he was going to give, and worrying about their festoons and pleats. Finally, behind the carriages came an Indian file of hackney cabs, and then there was nothing more, and our hero was free to proceed. Pushing aside the curtains, he sighed with relief and said with sincerity, "There goes the prosecutor. He lived, and then he died. And now they'll write in the papers that, to the great sorrow of his subordinates and of all mankind, a respected citizen has passed away, an exceptional father, and an exemplary husband. And they will say all sorts of things, and maybe add that he was accompanied to the grave by weeping widows and orphans, whereas, if one were to investigate the matter seriously, all there'd be left to his credit would be that he once had bushy eyebrows." Here Chichikov interrupted his line of thought to order Selifan to hurry, and it occurred to him that he should be pleased at having met the funeral procession. "They say it brings luck," he thought. In the meantime, the carriage turned into more deserted streets, and after a while, long wooden fences announced the end of the town. Then the cobbled roadway came to an end. The toll gate was passed. The town was left behind, and there was nothing around them. They were on the road again, and once more, on either side of the highway, milestones started to flash by, and station masters, wells, caravans of carts, gray villages with samovars, peasant women, and the lively bearded innkeeper dashing out of his inn with a bucket of oats, a man in torn bast sandals who'd walked 600 miles, little towns that had sprung up, complete with wooden stores, barrels of flour, bast sandals, loaves of bread, and other such junk. Striped wooden barriers, bridges under repair, endless fields on either side, a carriage belonging to a landowner, a soldier on horseback carrying a green ammunition box with an inscription of his artillery regiment and battery. Green, yellow, and freshly plowed black stripes flashing across the steppe, a song intoned in the distance, the tops of pine trees floating in the mist, the fading sound of church bells, crows like flies, and the endless horizon. Oh, Russia! Russia! I see you now. See you from my enchanted, beautiful, remote retreat. Everything is so poor, so uninviting, so haphazardly scattered over you. The eye will not be cheered and awed in turns by striking wonders of nature, crowned by marvelous works of art, by towns of towering palaces grown into the crags, their millions of windows glittering, by picturesque trees and ivy-covered houses amid the eternal roar and spray of a waterfall. The head will not be thrown back to contemplate rocky masses that soar into endlessness above it. The eternal lines of glistening mountains soaring into the bright, silvery sky will not flash through the dark arch in a foreground of tangled vines, ivy, and millions of wild roses. And you, Russia, all is exposed, desolate and flat. Your low-lying towns are specks and dots scattered inconspicuously over your plains. There's nothing to strike or charm the eye. But what, then, is the incomprehensible force that draws me to you? Why do I hear unceasingly your nostalgic song floating across the expanse of your plain, from sea to sea? What is there about this song? What is it that calls me, that sobs, that clutches at my heart? What are these sounds that caress me so painfully, penetrating my soul and quivering in my breast? What do you want of me, Russia? What is the uncanny link that unites us? Why do you stare like that? And why do you put all your hopes into this stare? Still bewildered, I remain motionless, my thought numbed by your vastness, while a heavy, threatening cloud casts its shadow over my head. What is the message implied in this limitless vastness of yours? Are you not the land to breed boundless thought, since you yourself are boundless? Are you not the land to give birth to a hero, since there's so much room and scope for him to show himself? Your vastness holds me in awe. It leaves a deep imprint upon my soul and makes my eyes shine with a strange power. Oh, what a glittering, enchanted, mysterious horizon of which the world knows nothing. Oh, Russia! Hold him, you fool, Chichikov shouted at Selifan. I ought to give you a taste of my steel, howled a courier with yard-long mustachios as they passed one another at full speed. Can't you see we're a government carriage? Damn you! And the carriage disappeared amid dust and thunder. There is so much allure, wonder, and fascination in the very word road, and how wonderful the actual road is. Imagine a clear day. Autumn leaves, the chill air. You muffle yourself closer in your traveling coat, pull your cap down over your ears, and settle down snugly and comfortably in a corner of the carriage. One last shiver runs through your limbs, and then a pleasant warmth spreads through you. The horses gallop on. A drowsiness creeps in stealthily and presses on your eyelids, and through a screen of sleep you hear the driver's refrain. It's not the whiteness of the snows, blending with the horses snorting and the rumble of the wheels. And then you are snoring, leaning heavily against your neighbor. Then you awaken. 5 stages have been left behind. The moon is out. You are in a town with wooden church cupolas, with dark spires, with dark log cabins and white stone houses. The moonlight falls in patches here and there like white sheets hung on the walls and spread over the roadway and the streets with coal-black shadows between them. The wooden roofs, lighted from the side, shine like metal. There's not a living soul in sight. Everything's asleep. Except, perhaps, for a lonely light trickling through a window. Some artisan mending his boots, or some baker fussing around his oven. But what do we care about them? Look at the night! Oh, heavenly forces, what a night you've created! And what air! And what a sky! So high, so remote in its inaccessible depths, stretching so boundlessly, so resoundingly, so brightly. But the night breathes coldly into the very eyes and lulls you back to sleep. You're already drowsy, forgetting everything. And you snore, and your poor traveling companion, crushed in his corner, jerks angrily. Then you wake, and the fields are once again before you. And then comes the step, and there's nothing around. Everything is in open emptiness. A milestone with its number flies straight into your eyes. Morning is coming. On the cold, whitened horizon, there's a pale golden streak. The air becomes cooler and harsher. You bundle yourself up more tightly in your overcoat. What nice cold air. What wonderful new slumbers. A jolt and you waken again. The sun stands high in the sky. Easy, easy. You hear the coachman's voice as the carriage drives down a steep slope. Down below, there's a dam and a wide, clear pond shining in the sunlight like brass. A village. Its huts scattered on the slope with the cross of the village church gleaming high by itself like a star. The voices of the peasants reach you. You realize that you are very hungry. Ah, God, how delightful the long road can be sometimes. How often, feeling myself despondent and near death, have I sought refuge with you, the road, and how generously you have rescued and saved me on each occasion. And how many wonderful ideas and poetic dreams have sprouted in my head. How many delightful emotions have I experienced while traveling over you.